growing up in these binary forms of academic and vocational validation have really skewed my perspective on what being, right, brief intermission. Yes, okay, we're on this one. Okay, great. Okay. So again, thinking about forms of validation that tend to be super binary, academic and vocational, and then thinking about what comfortability and pride in myself actually looks like. So what being proud of my own accomplishments, not necessarily tangible accomplishments, but ones that definitely matter to me, and kind of like what that looks like. So things that aren't important to my employer, things that aren't important to my professors, even aren't important to my parents, but things that are important to me. And to me, that's thinking about the joy I've derived from learning about my identity, from embracing it, the friends that I've made at Northeastern, the mentees that I've gone on to see do incredible things, times when I've stood up for myself in a class where a professor says something that I just don't necessarily feel like that is right, fighting with last year's 442 and AAC staff and the entire student body to get us spaces like the annex, and all of these things that I derive a lot of personal internal validation from, but that others might not necessarily recognize or deem important. And in this analysis and like deep reflection of myself, I wondered where my self-worth really peaked or where I had the most issues with my self-worth. And thinking about why it's hard for me to recognize these small everyday wins or even larger wins that aren't deemed as materially important to other people. And like many other young people, I think that my struggle with self-worth stems from the traumatic, life-altering experience that was college admissions. So let's rewind a bit. I went to an extremely competitive high school in Massachusetts, about 10 miles from Cambridge. And so obviously my high school is full of legacies, rich kids, crazy smart, crazy competitive students, and a lot of these people were my very close friends. And similar to a lot of these people, my dream ever since I was in the 3rd grade was to go to Harvard. And so college app season rolls around, friendships become a little toxic, GPAs become secrets, the whole 9 yards. And obviously I don't end up at the institution that shall not be named. And this was really life-shattering for me because I had spent my entire K-12 education really focused on getting into this one place that I thought I deserved to be at. And the 4 seniors from my high school that did end up going were 2 legacies and 2 of my very best friends that I had been super close with since I was about 12. And for a very, very long time, I struggled with that because I was just as smart as my friends. I was just as accomplished as my friends. And so why wasn't it me? What was wrong with me? I knew that I was smart enough to be there, but why didn't they pick me? And here's where I would add, everything happens for a reason. So with this toxic, pick-me attitude, coastal elite, Harvard is everything type beat vibe, I decided that I was going to wherever was cheapest for my first year, and then I was going to transfer out because, like, obviously I'm just better than everyone else. And so I settled on American University. And I picked American because as a political science major, a DC school was my world oyster. Side note, I really hate the phrase, like, the world is your oyster. I just think it's kind of gross. I also think oysters are gross, but anyway. And so I went, and I explored the nation's capital. I made friends. I, like, had a little fling for 3 weeks. It was great. I entered at the Senate. I went to the Nationals parade when they won because I missed like the Boston Red Sox one because I was obviously studying because that's all my life revolved around at that point. I went ice skating for the first time and I was almost happy. But in the back of my mind I thought like, I can do better. I belong at Harvard. And this mindset became really, really toxic as the year went on. As I experienced that, I had the scores and the GPA to be at Harvard, and I still thought that part of my life's mission was to attend that ratchet old institution, which, by the way, has the grossest freshman housing I've ever seen, having lived at both Northeastern American and like visiting friends wherever. Sorry, Isaiah, but like it's kind of gross. But I digress. So while some of my desire to attend Harvard was based around elitism that my high school planted in me, much of it was also just because I didn't want want to be a disappointment. My whole life, my parents had sacrificed so much for me to go to the high school that I went to. They expected me to go to an elite college, an Ivy tier institution that would springboard me to the success that they envisioned for me. I was so scared of not living up to their expectations, and I wanted to be validated by their pride in what I was doing, as opposed to their disappointment that every single time they told my relatives I was going to American University, they responded by asking which one. I also wanted to be validated for my work. I wanted to be validated for the late nights spent studying, the lack of sleep and balanced nutrition, the 4.0 GPA, the self-control to stay in and study while my friends went out. And at that point, I still hadn't envisioned or understood that there's a difference between external and internal validation. The only validation that mattered to me was external, something that others could see, something that others could comment on, something that others could be proud of. And to this day, as we know, I still struggle with this. And I think as humans, this is natural. It's nice to be appreciated. It's nice to have people look up to you. And it's especially nice when there's some sort of universal level of respect that is assigned to your accomplishments. But your resume is not your life. You are so much more than the material side of your accomplishments. When you are lying awake at night and thinking about all the things that feel invalidating, that test that you didn't do well on, the weird microaggressive comment that your classmate made, the hinge like that didn't end up in a match, think about what you are proud of. And these could be really small things. Like, wow, my eyeliner today? Absolute slay. Or, I am so glad I went to that GM, I met a new person. And this new person is really exciting. And just so many things that you learn throughout the day that you don't necessarily choose to reflect on because you're so focused on getting to X goal or accomplishing Y thing. And so this brings me to thinking about where I find meaning, where I am able to make myself feel better. And so to continue the story of my college experience and thinking about some of the other reasons I wanted to transfer, this brings me to kind of like elitism aside, why I was unhappy at American. And honestly, a big part of it was not because it wasn't Harvard. I had friends, I was doing great, I had a social life for once. It was really weird, but really exciting. But I grew up in a town that was also 40% Asian. In my own little bubble, I had Asian friends, I ate Asian food, and I felt like I really belonged in that town. American was 3% Asian at the time that I attended, and our ASU was about 30 people, very different, and we did not have a space on campus to gather, like point blank, like we would meet up on the quad. And also, Asian American studies, just not a thing, never to be heard of. So in a lot of ways, I think transitioning there really was a rude cultural awakening that showed me what identity traits and what parts of my identity mattered to me the most. So to start off with, I noticed that I developed possibly the strongest Bostonian pride while I was there. Things like going apple picking and rooting for the Red Sox were suddenly 50 times more important than they were in high school. I recognized my privilege. I also met with people who had unfathomable amounts of generational wealth. But at the same time, I miss having Indian food. I miss having first-gen friends. I miss it not being weird to eat Cheetos with chopsticks. I was missing community. For the first time, I had to search for Asian community instead of being surrounded by it. I realized just how important being Asian American and continuing to have opportunities to learn more about the Asian American experience really was to me. And as I developed this pride and this yearning, I really started to think about the different components that make up my identity, and I realized onions have layers. And also, everyone should watch Trek. And I could talk about Trek for hours, but I don't think that would be as meaningful. So more importantly, people are multidimensional. For everyone that I met, there was more than what met the eye. For myself, I had different personalities that I would use in different group settings, code switching if you will. There were parts of me that I could share with anyone, but there were other parts that you had to peel back some layers for. And as time went on, the pandemic was a thing. I ended up transferring to Northeastern, working on Team 442, working on the Asian Studies Student Advisory Board, co-oping, I started to internalize this idea that, like an ogre, I too was like an onion. People were like onions. My deepest apologies to all the Ivy Bowl folks out here, by the way. Like, I know you guys have heard this metaphor 1,000 times, so I'm so sorry. But I really like this concept. I think that on face, a fully intact onion, I can present myself at face value. So this is my identity in the workplace, my identity when you first get to know me, the big, scary, intimidating person that I apparently am. And that's, you know, Megha Prasad, 4th year, political science, business major, Lexington, blah, 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 works at a big firm, likes to crochet when her wrists aren't carpal tunneled to the max. But you peel back a layer, and you realize that she's also some sort of activist. Her parents immigrated here, and at some point in time she wanted to be a lawyer, and maybe eventually wants to pursue grad school, but doesn't quite know when or how that's going to happen. You peel back another layer, you learn that I'm chronically single. My favorite place in the world is Walden Pond. I don't like eating before 11 a.m. because it makes me nauseous, and I'm not actually that good at finance, I just know how to use Excel. Another layer. Now you know that I transferred schools because I crave a sense of belonging. I'm terrified of moving to New York after graduation because I don't think that I belong there. I love my friends and my family more than anything, and standing up here talking is actually very, very scary. And at my core, I'm someone who struggles with validation and self-worth. And now I don't think that this onion metaphor is particularly revolutionary, nor do I think I'm an extremely complex person, but I do think, however, that being able to peel back the layers of my onion and almost understanding my layers as some sort of Maslow's pyramid of needs helps me a lot in understanding what brings me joy and what I need in order to be happy. And what I need in order to be happy actually isn't all that revolutionary. So recently a lot of higher education research on retention and graduation rates has been focused on how colleges and universities can work to foster a sense of belonging. Like, this has been identified as something that students need in order to complete college to be retained at a certain school. This sense of belonging is something that researchers are starting to look at over things like course offerings or the number of professors to students in a class. And so going back to American, I struggled to develop a sense of belonging. And this was honestly because having a large, diverse community around me was very important to me. And so now when people ask me why I transferred, it's not because I thought that I could do better, it's not that because I thought I belonged at Harvard, but it's because I realized that I'm someone who needs an institution to foster a sense of belonging. And that institution was not interested in fostering a sense of belonging for students like me. They were not interested in investing resources in my community, and it just, at the end of the day, was not going to be a cohesive learning environment for me. Which is not to say that Northeastern has been sunshine and rainbows, not to say that we have an incredibly diverse Asian Studies program, but we're getting there. And I think a huge part of why I've chosen to remain active on 442, why I've chosen to give this talk, is because yes, we have done a lot of work to improve Northeastern and to open pathways to develop this sense of community, to feel that they actually belong here and not need to search for another place that may or may not work out for them. But there is still so much to be done. And as I enter my senioritis phase and continue to reflect and to be an elderly, old person in the community, I've also been thinking about my impact and my legacy. And that leads me to our next lesson, which is to leave spaces better than how you found them. Sometimes I feel guilty about not doing a 5th year. I think that there is so much yet to be done. I don't want to leave this community behind. But I also think about what I was able to do and what that means for the next generation. The annex did not just happen. It took months of writing letters, emails, meetings with administration to get us here. Hiring new faculty to teach Asian and Asian American studies did not just happen. That too took months of meetings, an incredible Asian Studies program director, a dean who is finally willing to push it through, and students who did not give up and showed up to job talks. So as I leave Northeastern, I hope that this fight for space, for belonging, for academics, does not end with the institutional memory of upperclassmen. If we want to continue to see a diverse student body, to see ourselves reflected in our community, to continue seeing events like PAACx and Dance For Me and First Year Fridays, we need to continue to fight for our space and our existence on campus. Peel back the layers of your onions and think about what this community means to you and where you would be without it. As a transfer, as someone who lost half of my college experience to COVID, the AAC and this community has been a huge, huge factor in making me still feel like, yes, this is home. This is a safe place. This is a safe space where I can plant my onion and grow. And so to conclude, I'm just going to say that belonging matters, and do what you can to ensure that this community will continue to survive beyond where we've gotten, because we are doing so good, and we can do so much better. Thank you.